Welcome everybody. Here we have Andy Lane and Greg Whyte, two professors that have known each other for over 30 years. I think that's right. I know. He has tried to hide from me. He has tried to hide from me, but I have found him each time. He hasn't tried. And what Greg is a world famous sports scientist. He's a two-time Olympian. I remember him training for the third Olympics. I stayed at his house for a while where he used to practice the shooting above my head, which was a sign of the difficult times. Oh, so I know that, and that's why he didn't call it.
I was actually aiming for you and I didn't get you.
That is why my hair is looking so thin. The bullets were wasting off the top. Greg more well known recently for all his work with celebrities, doing some amazing challenges. David Walliams first swam the Channel, which at the time it was an amazingly difficult. It remains an amazingly difficult feat. And if anyone ever thinks about doing that, they just need to go down to the sea and start swimming out and get the bite of the cold. Look out and think, oh, only another 23 miles to go or so. How difficult that challenge is, and hopefully what we get through this today, how the mindset of someone goes from that is an enormously difficult challenge that I am prepared to take on, and I think I have a good chance of being able to do. So that's what we're going to be trying to fish out. Greg's got he's got a book, Achieve the Impossible, which is absolutely fantastic, and a website called The Why Answer, which I think is excellent. So Greg, welcome.
Thank you, Andy. Very kind. And you found me again. Here I am hiding in the office, and you found me.
I have found you. So Greg, tell us a little bit about some of the exploits you've got up to in terms of working with people to do some of the amazing things. What's the highlight of all of those things? What's the biggest challenge you've gone through?
That's an interesting question, actually, Andy, because I think there's such a breadth. I think obviously the most well-known ones are the sport relief and comic relief challenges, and I've looked after 32 of those, believe it or not. So, which, from a run perspective, everyone will remember Eddie Izzard, 43 marathons in 51 days, but many of them included running. Davina, we ran a marathon at the end of an ultra triathlon from Edinburgh down to London. We ran 30 miles with John Bishop in the Arc to Arch, so actually a lot of them have included running through that. But actually, I think, and they have been great challenges and really fabulous, really very special. But I think probably it's the ones with others that have been some of my, most epic challenges. So I remember training 4 women to swim across the English Channel, which was just probably my favorite challenge of all time. But I've worked with a heart transplant patient, a guy called Kevin Mashford, absolutely amazing. I trained the first paraplegic James Wood to swim across the English Channel. That was some going. That was a really amazing achievement. And then actually last year, probably the most recent one, I had a client from the US and we broke the world record for 7 marathons on 7 continents. And when I say this, I still think to myself, that can't be right. But including the flight time and the running, so flight time and running, 7 continents, we did it in 81 and a half hours, which is just truly phenomenal. And that was with a guy who'd never run a marathon before. So yeah, it's quite a breadth of different things, and I love it, as you can tell from all the ones I've done.
But when they come to you and they describe this, what's the sort of breakdown point? So where do we start the training? And quite often, because we've worked with some of the ultras endurance before, is that often people want to get into some enormous amounts of training, and it's in sort of how to sort of charter them through where you're at now and where you've got to go to, because I find that one of those really difficult parts, because they often want to start too close to the end, and the bit close to the end is often not quite near where they think it's going to be.
No, absolutely right. It's funny because there's multiple stages in it, and I think it really does the importance of a coach, I think, is understanding and establishing who the performer is and what that performer is and how they tick, and try and understand them, because it is a very much a bespoke approach. I think, sometimes you sort of think, oh, it's just cut and paste, and all they do is just cut and paste the program in, but it's not. It really is about understanding that. And at one end of the spectrum, the work I've done with Olympians is the big problem you've got with those guys is that they overdo it, just too much volume. And they're so desperate for it, and they will bang things in. And listen, me and you have worked with Olympic athletes on a number of occasions where what you find is they've got secret training that actually, in their mind, what's really interesting about it, and I think that it's akin to other disorders, things like obesity, is that it's the interpretation of what they're doing is slightly different. So I remember one athlete, a very famous athlete, Olympian, who was clearly overtraining. She had all sorts of problems. She had loss of menstrual function, so she had amenorrhea. She had low bone mineral density, and I sat with her about the training she was doing. She noted down the training. I looked at it, I thought, well, that's not that much. So I said to her, look, what I'm gonna do is pop an actigraph on you, so just some wearable tech, and we'll just see what you're doing. Every morning, every day, 90-minute run, which she hadn't written down on the bit of paper. And I questioned her about it, and I said, is this exactly what you're doing? She said, yeah, that's exactly what I'm doing. And I said to her, what's this 90 minutes? Oh, that's just a warm up for the day. 90 minutes a day, every day, and I think, and to her, it wasn't a run, it was just a shakeout, which is interesting. And then, of course, the other end of that spectrum is actually working with people who simply do not understand how difficult it is going to be, who don't have the same understanding of self, who, the classics of those with the sport relief and comment relief, people who are to some extent physically illiterate. They've never really been into sport. They never really didn't really understand themselves and how to develop that in themselves. And of course, the approach at either end of that spectrum is incredibly different about how you structure training. And of course, everybody lies somewhere on that continuum. And what you're trying to do is discern who they are, where they are on that continuum, and then actually create the bespoke program for them to make sure that you optimize what they're doing.
Yeah. Do they get into their goals and that sort of thing, and monitoring it and then judging how they're close to getting to it?
I mean, for me, goals are everything. I think any structured plan, any periodized plan has to have goals. You can't create a plan without goal setting. It's as simple as that. And I think, and that's the long-term goal. Obviously, what we're trying to do, we're trying to run 43 marathons or swim the channel or, break the world record. That's the long-term plan. But then the medium-term plans, what are the key markers within that medium term? So, for a marathon, for example, it's like, if you want to run a 3-hour marathon, you've got to be able to run a 1:20 half. So there's your medium-term goal straight away about running that. But of course, back downstream from that, if you want to run a 1:20 half, you've got to be able to run a 36 sub 10K. And so therefore you've got to be able to run a circa 17-minute 5K. And we can talk about those calculations and algorithms, etc. But to some extent, what the main goal creates the medium-term goal and the short-term goals within that. And what's crucial is that, what our job as coaching is to make sure that the athlete understands. Now, again, some athletes need that information. They need data. They need those lines in the sand very definitively, and they measure themselves on it constantly. Whereas others, it means absolutely nothing to them. And again, you have to nurture some people to move towards them. Others, you have to rein them back so they're not racing at it, trying to get that medium-term goal too early. Because what will happen is they'll break down, they'll be injured or sick. But 100%, goals are everything. And without the framework of those goals, if you think about it in human terms, it's like the skeleton. Those goals create the skeleton around which you're going to place the meat, which is the training sessions in order to reach those goals. So yeah, absolutely right. Goals are key.
And I mean, I agree completely. And what I find with lots of the endurance athletes. And it does differ by sport, but it is that they are quite outcome focused in terms of they're looking at the how fast it takes to run X distance, and judging, and their judgment, they get quite negative when they don't get the good time that they want to. And in training, they miss out on those times. And almost inevitably, in my mind, because the course is not set up for them to go that quickly, for starters, and their mind is not set up to go that quickly from the start. And I try to encourage them to get a process mindset, and how that varies from sport by sport. And thinking, I've been doing a lot of concept 2 rowing. You do not escape the ongoing feedback. That's the first bit, and that seeing that is brutal. Trying to cover it up is very difficult. You sort of say to someone, think of a process goal, and they go, what's a process goal? And I say, okay, what about thinking of technique? So if it's rowing, think of long arms, and then think of the 3 phases of the rowing stroke. So you're going to catch, you're going to engage the legs, and then you're going to pull back, and then you're going to recover, and really and just try and think through those different ways, get them, image them in your mind, and so on. Or in running is the classic, I think, to imagine or to watch someone's feet in front of you, and try and synchronize your feet to their running, and think of running smoothly, and then the run tall type things, and all those sort of techniques. But they find it so difficult. And how has that gone with some of the sports you've or athletes you've used?
And what's interesting on that, Andy, I think is it has actually been made even more difficult for some people because of wearable tech. Is that I think we've had this chat over Twitter before, about how it has ruined running for some people. Having a watch on and knowing what your kilometer pace is, and what your heart rate is, and what's going on. And so I think I built my career on that. That's what in the early days, exercise physiology. That's what it was. It was understanding those zones, understanding what's the heart rate at anaerobic threshold, what pace are we looking at? Are we looking at stochastic, variable pace going through? Are we looking at square? All those sort of things. They are incredibly important, but it's how you use them, which I think is key. And if you take a look at it, I think one of the big problems actually is that the whole of sport has been infected by it, particularly linear endurance sport in general. And so you look at bikes now, you've got power meters, you've got you've got your GPS on, so you've got speed, you've got power, you've got your heart rate, you've got your cadence. I mean, death by data is what it is. And for some people that's great because they live by it and they love it, and I think the difference is they know how to use it, they know when it's important. But for others, it can absolutely destroy it. So again, I think it comes down to that bespoke approach. It's understanding what it is. And I think the biggest danger, and I see this in my own training, I think the biggest danger is when you set a goal for a session. And when we talk about those goals, I mean, I've got, if you work with me, you have a goal for a session. This is not a 3-month goal or a 6 weeks goal. It's a session goal. And on a long run, what I'm trying to do is hold race pace. Hold race pace for those long runs, and I do this thing called reverse periodization. So what I'll do is I'll increase it at race pace as we go through. So that what you're trying to do is actually hit each kilometer mark or mile mark at a given pace. And I think the thing that I see in myself, and actually see in a lot of people that I work with, is that as soon as they start to slip away from that goal, it's a disaster. It's the worst run they've had. It's absolutely horrible. And the negative feedback they then get from that. So they're out for a 20 miler and the target is 5-minute kilometers. And all of a sudden, they've gone through the half marathon in bang on time, 1:45. And then all of a sudden they start to slip off that. And it goes to 5:05, 5:10. Oh, that's it. Rubbish session. Absolute disaster. Worst session I've had. There's no way I'm going to do this, and all that sort of stuff. Instead of actually thinking, look, it's a 20-mile run, and what you run that 20 in, what we're trying to target that. But I think what you have to think is with those goals is that they are movable, and there are lots of reasons why. You might, what the weather is, what the topography of the terrain is that you're going over, what you've done the day before, what happened with the family at the weekend. I mean, the list goes on of what can impact on a single session. And I think the key is just to be able to use all of that information to make sure you make the right judgment call. And that is that, are you dropping off the pace because you're too lazy and you can't be bothered? Or are you dropping off the pace because actually there's a good reason to be dropping off the pace, and it still means that what you're getting from that 505, 510, you're still getting good quality training impulse, which is making a difference to your output, your outcome. So I think it's about balancing that, and that I think, you know, the difficult thing is for people who don't have experience. So the guys that are coming into these environments really new, is it's very difficult for them to understand that. And I think, again, that's where the coach makes a big difference, is just to really nurture them through that process and say, you know what, listen, you finished the 20, fantastic, and actually you went through the half in bang on schedule, brilliant. Next time what we're going to do, we do a 20, we're going to try and squeeze that to 15, 16. And then all of a sudden, you know, it becomes positive reinforcement instead of negative reinforcement.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of points that I think are really good there. And I mean, with my athletes, it's kind of, you want, the process goal might be, when it starts getting awkward, you need to switch on to what you're doing. And I quite like if people go swimming, they haven't got all the distraction in front of them. These swimmers find no trouble at all to think about when it gets difficult to focus on the stroke. So you try, I mean, that's an encouragement. But what I then really like to then is to tie the goals in with the whole, not just the psychology of what your mindset is to focus on, make the here and now as best as possible, but actually your physiological effort is also an important part of this. And you could be achieving 5 minutes per kilometre, but it could be at an intensity which is really unsustainable for in anything but your one-off race. And so having those physiological goals, which say, well, actually, I mean, when I've trained for marathons, I said, well, actually, and I failed to do 3 hours many times, but you've got to be able to kick through the hard bit and have something left for the end. And I would go in the lab and find my thresholds, and then push the thresholds, and then train within the threshold, which you're going to do for marathons, which I'd know my heart rate zone of 130 to 150. And I said, okay, well, my 2 hour runs are in 150. And if I'm running at 147 and it's hard and that's slow, and it's slower than what I'm normal, but I'm doing 147, then I stick at 147, because that is achieving that goal. Because what I am doing is, I then reframe it in my head to say, what my goal here is adaptation, is progress. It's not to achieve. And in the end, on the race day, I am prepared to push to 150, 160 if need to. But on the training day, my goal is adaptation. And it's like, and this is the bit I think is really important for people to do, is to sit down beforehand and make sure they're clear what the goal is and stick to the goal, and almost see that goal being achieved and how you're going to achieve that goal. Because it stops you, I know that it stops your mind racing to go, I can't do that.
Yeah, I think what's interesting though, Andy, is that, you know, and herein lies the sort of debate you have. I have it constantly about, how do you program? Do you program based on power output and speed, or do you program on what is fundamentally the most important measure, and that is heart rate? Now, why? You know, and I've been doing this 3 decades now, right? And that, to some extent, that was what you had at the time. You didn't have power meters. GPS was non-existent. And so therefore we used heart rate. But the great thing about heart rate is it's a global measure of physiologic function and physiologic intensity. So when you look at your heart rate, you know that's how hard you're working. What the speed output of that is, or the power output of that is, maybe something entirely different. You know, but and you're absolutely right. And what we're trying to do is bring about adaptation within that specific zone, so that on race day, what we then do is we become more economic. We can run faster at the same relative physiologic load, and so therefore it becomes sustainable. You know, you're absolutely right. You know, if you look at my program, it's almost invariably based upon heart rate when I program athletes, because what I want them to be able to do, what I want to see is what's your running speed at that physiologic load. That's the more important question. Not how fast, how hard can you push yourself to sustain a particular speed? So I think it's just, it sounds a bit, or it sounds the same, but it's not. It's just flipping that around so that you never have a disappointing run. If your target is, if your threshold, if you're looking for 140 to 150 on a long run, you never have a bad run if you're saying 140, 150. If your target is 5 minutes a kilometer and you drop it down to 5:02, you could see that as disappointing. And yet the physiologic demand and the adaptation is optimal because you're in that zone where you're looking for. So I think, again, it's the goal. Make sure the goal's right, and that'll make sure that you deliver on that goal.
Yeah, I like that part. I mean, the other part of your training, which is I like, and which is not, is that instead of for marathons, it's about sort of getting accustomed to the pace and then growing the distance. Yeah. And what I followed those sorts of training programs, that week 1 of the training program isn't harder than week 12. By week 12, you adapted into week 1 perfectly. It's got no harder, and all you've noticed as you've gone through is the progression, your adaptation, and that I think that's missing a lot of training. In that, when I'm a psychologist, you go, well, as people can make me confident, and I then try to make through their training, and what I want is the training to make them confident, and then some of the techniques, imagery and goal setting, self-talk, they can work, but they won't work unless they won't work as well, or they won't really work unless you've got that basis behind you. And so you've got to have the adaptation and that utter confidence and belief that you've got the progress.
What's key on that, Andy, I think is absolutely bang on, because I talk about this sort of ad infinitum now, and that is this idea that belief, confidence, motivation, is one of the key ones. People often say, "Oh, how do you motivate people?" And I say, with all of those things, with belief, so I just think about belief, commitment, and motivation. It's a triumvirate, but it's self-fulfilling, and that is the first and most important thing, is that you believe that you can do it. Now, if on week 1, what you do is you go out, if you're marathon training, and on week 1 you go out for a 20-miler as your first week's training, and you basically crumble. You give up at 13 miles, and you can't run for the next 5 days because you've got such bad DOMs. There's not a great deal of belief that's going to be developed from that. And because of that, you then start to think, "Oh, I'll never be able to do it, never be able to." So what you then start to do is commit less. So you don't commit the time, the resources, the effort. And because of that, you then don't see the results. And because you're not seeing results, motivation goes down. Motivation goes down, your belief goes down, commitment goes down, and all of a sudden it's descending. Whereas actually what the training program should be doing is actually developing that belief. And that is, I'll tell you what, what's race pace? What you're looking for. Week 1, we're going to go out for a 5K at marathon race pace. Look at that, you can do 5K, boom. And you're thinking, well, 5K, I mean, it's still a long way off 42, but actually I can do 5K. The next week you're on 8K. Well, look at that, I'm on 8K, we're progressing, tick, and because of that belief starts to come. You then think, we can do this. You start to commit more, and as you commit more, motivation rises. So I think that the key for everyone to remember is that these aren't innate, things that people have. "Oh, he's very motivated." He's not very motivated. What he's done is he's developed a strategy to enhance his motivation. And I think we have to build and create, when it comes to belief, commitment, motivation, and things like confidence, and whatever words we want to use. They are created, they're not innate.
Yeah, they are. And I think the person's got to be fairly active in that monitoring program to see those benefits, and be realistic as to why they've made improvements. Because I think one of the fragile base of performance is when someone psychs themselves up as a really quick performance and expects them to do that every week, because it's not going to happen unless they psych themselves up the same way every week, and that isn't that realistic either. And that isn't, people don't kind of like this. "Well, I need to get more mentally tough." You don't really need mental toughness. You need to accept where you're at physically. I mean, I do work with people say, can you help me overcome fatigue? And I say, yep. And so I'll be able to run and not get tired. Nope. Okay, well, what will happen? Because what will happen is that you will be running to the point where it hurts again. All right, it'll just be a quicker place. All right, that's all that happen. You'll run quicker. You won't overcome it. And what that fatigue is doing is it's a evolved mechanism to say, stop going. Our body can't cope. But you'll push. And what I'll teach you to do is learn to interpret that as that's where I need to be. That's not where I'm not going to be. Because if you're not at the point in many race, in almost any race, at some point, at that point, you could have gone quicker.
Yeah,
you've gone quicker. And
you know what? It reminds me. It was a great conversation. When I was an athlete, I remember having a conversation with a mate of mine. He was a quicker runner than me, and I was a quicker swimmer than him. And I remember him saying to me, like, Whitey, I'd love to be able to swim as quick as you, man, because it just wouldn't hurt as much. And I said to him, are you crazy? I said, I am hurting just as much as you are. The only difference is it hurts for less time. And that's the truth of it. Is you watch the boys running 2:05 on a marathon, and they're not. It might look like they're comfortable, but they are hurting exactly the same as the guy who's running 4:20. And to my mind, it's why I always watch the big city marathons, and I am utterly inspired by the guys who are running the 4.5 hours, because they are in the same purgatory as the 2-hour runner for twice as long. Yeah. Now that's mental toughness right there. You know what I mean? And so I think if people sort of misunderstand that relationship, you know, and of course, to my mind, you know, what people say, you know, why train hard? Well, there's two reasons why you train hard, in my opinion. The first one is that the harder you train, the more you'll enjoy it. And I think that and to some extent, that's because you've learned what misery is. And I've, you know, this idea of a misery gauge is that you've actually reset that misery gauge, so you know where the misery is. Number one. And number two is you get to the pint at the end that little bit quicker. And so you'll be sat in the pub while other people are still out on the course. And that, you know, that's two great reasons to train really, really hard: enjoyment and a quicker finish.
And I mean, you've hit the point, a real good point there is, and what people who run slowly do is don't give themselves credit for their mental toughness, and the fact that the exercise and intensity is how hard can I push, which is not, and how hard can I push is not the same as how fast can I go. Because if you are a machine like Mo Farah or Usain Bolt, that when I hit the how hard can I push, I can either go for a very long time or very fast and short time. But you know, when you see some of the people at the London Marathon who with as they get to Tower Bridge 2.5 hours in, and they're honest. I mean, I've done the London Marathon. I've gone up over the bit. I think it's about 17 miles. You look across, and you see people coming over, and they look haunted. And I'm so pleased that I've got not that long to go, and I've just got. You're at the point where in my head when I've got to that is I can grind this out. No matter how hard it'll be, I'm there. I wouldn't, and I look to see there, and they look worse than me, but they haven't got past the halfway mark yet, and that's so the. And you think, and you guys, so you have to utter respect for them, but it is about people giving themselves permission to say that was really tough, and rewarding themselves to say you have overcome great amount of toughness, irrespective of time. I mean, some of the I worked with Christine Bleakley on the challenge, and she was incredibly tough on herself. And when we did some work with her, he thought, you know, she was falling in all the time. It was cold. It was difficult. Water skiing across the channel. This was not a skill set that there's any background towards. And you think, well, what way to get some hope into that? And the hope, if there was a bit of hope, I remember thinking, well, what point are you going to stop? What point will you decide I'm not picking the rope up again? I said, oh no, none. I said, there we go. I'm thinking, crikey, we've got some. This is our mechanism here. That she's not going to give in. I mean, you know, I can go out on Strictly. I can go out on one show, and I can pick that rope up. And you thought, and once you get a hook into the beliefs that people have got, and I think people could draw more confidence out of their own successes far more without judging about how good it is in relation to others.
And it's an interesting one, isn't it, Andy? Because I think it's actually it is this idea of what is success. I think it drills into that, doesn't it? And I think some of the problem is that we live in a very successful nation. We just watched the Olympics and the Paralympic Games. We talk all the time about gold and the gold rush, and even programs are called the gold rush, and it's all about medals and places and what we're doing. And I think in that, add on top of that, talk about the marathon, but actually we can talk about the park run. What time did you go? What was your time? And I think we've become obsessed by metrics instead of actually thinking about what if you've never run a 5K before and you turn up to the park run and you run around a 5K start to finish, that is an enormous success. Whether it is taking you an hour and 15 minutes or whether it's taking you 15 minutes, it's an incredible success. And I think it's just rowing back, I think, away from, talks about wearable tech and all that sort of stuff. It's rowing away from the metrics and actually just thinking about what am I going to be pleased with? What's my success? What's my marker of success? And it is actually about, to some extent, it's why I love doing ultras, is that nobody asked me what time I did at the Marathon des Sables, because it's irrelevant. Did you get round? I made it to the finish. Brilliant. And so I think we need to do that in the shorter distances as well. Yes, from a personal perspective, if you're looking to take your 5K down from an hour to 55 minutes, that's a very personal goal. What you don't want to do is take that and compare it to others. I think that's where the difficulty comes.
I agree completely. I think that once you've learned about yourself and what you're capable of, and then you establish a challenge around that, and I think things like courses, you've got to establish on the course you're going to do it on, because they all vary. And park run, I've done, I don't know how many park runs I've done, 400 and something. That's a lot. And if I wanted to do if I want to do a fast time, I'll go on a slightly short one and one with fewer turns. And you just got ironing out the bits. You go, well, hold on. So you've got to do this time because of, and then you just pick all the factors to make it go quick.
Yeah.
I mean,
also what you do is you taper for a month before it as well, instead of actually having done the park run the week before and run as hard as you possibly can. Everything would change. You take a day off work before it, you make sure your carbohydrate loaded, or whatever it is that makes you go quicker. You would put everything in place. And again, that's how you interpret performance. You have to interpret performance in the round. You can't just look at it, as it's not the same run every time you go out. What are the factors that are going to impact on that performance? Actually, that, to my mind, is the learning process. Is actually that if at some point you want to do your best run ever, by understanding the factors that impact on your run performance, you'll be much better able to institute those and actually optimize your chances of a very quick run of a PB. So it's a learning process constantly.
Yeah, and I think if there's one of the key things I think we've pulled out is that training is about learning about your body, trying to recognize adaptation, trying to set goals regarding what progress you can make. I think trying to see where the progress is in terms of, I think physiological adaptation is really important, and I think heart rates are useful. And I mean, then I often think people can little gems to throw into that is to go, when it's a really hot day, you get a higher heart rate. Take the judge off a bit, really. Why it's hot? Because your heart's pumping a bit more. Guess why? Push the heat out.
Yep.
And so on. But you then those bits of learning about yourself instead of evaluating and judging yourself. And then if you get negative by it, just to kind of accept that's because you want to try really hard, but not judge too much that it's hell and damnation occurs for you as an athlete as a consequence, which we hear.
Well, I think what we have distilled this down to, Andy, is actually about personal. It's about you as a runner, and I think that's the thing. Whether it's from the programming, whether it's the goal setting, whether it's the racing, it is about you as an individual. And I think what we, God, I mean, and how many people do you talk to about Strava? Or where are you on the Strava list? Well, it's almost an irrelevance. It really is an irrelevance. It matters on the day at a race. If you are looking to win it, where you come does matter. But many people don't do that. And I think it is about making it as bespoke as possible. And everybody's journey, that terrible word that people use, journey, but everybody's journey is different. And I think rather than make sure that you're on your rails, and me and a mate of mine, we often talk about this. Look, drive in your lane. Don't worry about what the Ferraris are doing in the fast lane. Don't worry about what the Juggernaut's doing behind you. Just do what you do and do it to the best that you can do it. Now, at some stage in the future, you might move from the slow lane into the middle lane, maybe into the fast lane, but that will be because of your personal journey, not because you're looking at it thinking, first year at running marathons, I should be over there running 2:30s. Well, if you are, good luck to you, lads. Some going, but keep it personal. And I think if you do that, invariably you get a much more positive atmosphere that you'll be training and competing in.
The fast lane is no relative of mine, by the way.
Not at our age, mate. Not at our age.
No, lane. You see, lane.
Oh, I see. Yeah, I missed that.
Oh, yeah, I know.
Joke, yeah, lost, mate.
So, Greg, I think we've got listeners captivated. Where can they? What are you up to right now? Not right now, but generally in work, and where can people find you to find more out about your work?
Well, do you know what? It was one of those things in lockdown. Somebody obviously, it's one of those things. I about 2 years ago, I did this thing called the Norseman, which is an ultra. They call it an extreme triathlon. They call it the toughest triathlon on the planet. That's what they call it. It is tough, and we made a film about it. And actually, so that film is out there on my channels. But in a moment of weakness, I went in for the ballot for another race called the Patagon Man, which is in Patagonia in Chile. Same sort of thing, extreme triathlon. Having said after the Northman, I will never do another one of those. Here I am. So actually,
you've said that many a time before. I've never done.
That's the trouble. There's something loose at the top here, but yeah. So December we've got Patagon Man, which I'm now, currently and have been for a number of months now, prepping for. So I've just finished the last mesocycle and about to move into the next mesocycle, which is sort of the pre-competition, which is slightly different in this sense, because what I do now is go really long and really long bricks. So it's quite an unusual approach, but that's currently what we're doing. And I mean, you can follow that sort of stuff. By far the best place is thewhiteanswer.com. Nice cup of tea. Someone's bringing you tea. No one brings me tea. If you just head over to thewhiteanswer.com, white with a Y, and there's loads. I mean, there's loads and loads of content on there, and I think there's ways in which you can ask questions as well, and people can pose questions and actually ask for stuff. And so yeah, and obviously social media, which we love social media.
Love social media.
Up and downs of social media.
Yeah, I take a lot of abuse in my life, but I don't see social media being the cause of it, and a lot of people say so. And you just choose to engage with people, and I think people can learn a lot from having a chat with this. And UK Run Chat, who are putting this podcast out, have a lovely chat hour a couple of times a week, and I've joined in for that, and I think you get a lot of good stuff there.
Yeah. So,
Greg, it's been emotional.
Yeah, but I'm welling up as we speak, mate.
Yeah.
I'm welling.
That's good.
It's been great, mate. Thanks for having me on, mate. It's great to chat.